The vote had already passed by the time I reached the gallery window. I pressed my 4 hands against the cold glass and watched the exile orders scroll across the display wall below. 17 species, names, population counts, relocation deadlines. The Gurok representative was weeping openly. The Toll delegation sat perfectly still, which was somehow worse. I found my own species listed 3rd on the manifest, the Vethari, 240 million souls, given 60 galactic cycles to vacate every transit lane, every trade post, every home we had built across the stars. My name is Kale Voss. I am Vethari. I have 4 lungs and pale violet skin, and a memory that never lets anything go. I remember the exact texture of that glass under my palms. I remember the sound of the chamber below, 240 member species, and barely a murmur of protest. The Galactic Conclave had spent 3 days deliberating and about 40 seconds actually voting. It was called a restructuring of civilizational cohesion. I had a shorter name for it. So did everyone else who wasn't casting a sigil. The official reason was incompatibility. Too aggressive, too numerous, too strange. The Gurok had territorial disputes with 4 neighboring systems. The Toll had a reproductive rate the Conclave found alarming. My people had the crime of memory. We recorded everything, forgot nothing, and had spent 3 centuries documenting Conclave corruption in detail, so precise it made the senior members uncomfortable. One by one, 17 species had been quietly shuffled toward the edge of the table, and then, with a single session, pushed off it entirely. We had nowhere to go. I took the first transport I could get. A converted freight hauler, 40,000 Vethari, packed into cargo space designed for mineral ore. The air recyclers ran at 60%. Children cried. Elders sat in silence, which among my people means something very close to despair. I sat near the rear bulkhead and read every news feed I could access, searching for anything, any member state that had opened its borders, any emergency resolution, any crack in the wall the Conclave had built around us. What I found instead was a transmission from a planet most of the galaxy considered a footnote. Earth had requested emergency address rights before the Conclave. The request had been granted, I suspected, the same way you let a child speak at a formal dinner, with the comfortable assumption that it won't say anything important. I watched the recording on a cracked screen in the cargo hold, my translation unit clipped behind my ear. The speaker was a woman. She stood at the Conclave podium without notes, without aids, without the elaborate ceremonial robes every other member state used to signal their importance. She wore a plain dark jacket, her hair was short and silver at the edges. Her name, the lower caption told me, was Director Amara Cole of the Earth Provisional Authority. She said, very clearly, and without any visible fear, Earth will accept them, all 17, permanent residency, full integration support. We'll sort out the rest as we go. The chamber went silent, not the polite silence of consideration, the deep, startled silence of an institution that had never once been surprised. I played the recording 3 more times, then I rerouted my transport. I arrived above Earth on a gray morning, the planet turning slowly beneath us, wrapped in cloud and ocean, and something I did not have a word for yet. It looked alive in a way that most worlds do not. I would later learn that humans had a habit of describing their planet as breathing. I understood immediately what they meant. The docking process was chaos. There is no other word for it. Earth had exactly 1 orbital station capable of handling deep space traffic, and it had been built to manage a few hundred ships per year. In the 14 months following Director Cole's announcement, it was receiving that many per week. Queues stretched across the approach corridor. Translation errors stacked up like unpaid debts. Half the landing pads were still under construction. A Gurok colony ship the size of a small moon tried to dock in the wrong lane and took out 2 communication arrays that were apparently the only ones covering the southern hemisphere. My assigned coordinator met me at the arrivals terminal. He was a young man, maybe 26 years old, with dark hair and the kind of tired eyes that come from too much work and not enough sleep. He was holding a handwritten sign with my name on it. He had spelled it wrong. He had written Kale Voss, dropping the second S, which in my language technically shifts the meaning from ambassador to unwanted guest. I corrected him gently. He turned red, apologized 4 times, and immediately wrote the correction on his wrist with a pen. His name was Owen. Owen spoke 3 Earth languages and was learning my 4th dialect from a software program he had built himself, using public linguistic databases and what I can only describe as stubborn enthusiasm. He got my honorifics wrong for 2 weeks. He never once stopped trying. On the 15th day, he addressed me correctly for the first time, and looked so genuinely proud of himself that I did something I had not done since before the exile order. I laughed. Earth was not ready for us. I want to be honest about that. The infrastructure wasn't there. The resources were stretched. The plan, such as it was, had been assembled in weeks by a government that had never managed interstellar resettlement, and had only the vaguest idea what most of the arriving species actually needed to survive. The first toll settlement was built with corridors too narrow for their body width. The initial food synthesis units distributed to Gurok families used a protein base that was mildly toxic to Gurok liver tissue. A batch of atmospheric processors for the Vethrok order ran at the wrong humidity level for 3 months before anyone caught it. But here is what I noticed, and what I could not stop thinking about during those first chaotic months. Every time something went wrong, humans did not retreat into procedure. They did not form a committee and wait for a report. They showed up, sometimes with tools, sometimes with food, sometimes with nothing but the willingness to stand next to you and figure it out together. Owen appeared at my door the morning the humidity error was discovered, with 2 portable units he had borrowed from a university laboratory and a written apology from Director Cole herself. He also brought food from a market nearby. He was not certain which of the items I could safely eat, so he had brought 7 different things and laid them out on the table for me to choose. I chose 3 of them. One tasted strange. I ate it anyway. The conclave watched all of this from a distance and said nothing publicly. Privately, I knew from my old diplomatic contacts, they were taking careful notes. Earth had no standing, no military force worth mentioning, no fleet, no trade leverage, no seat at any table that mattered. What they had was 400 million humans and 17 exiled species, and a willingness to fail loudly and keep going. The city that grew fastest in those early years was New Nairobi. It had been a major urban center before the arrivals, and it became the natural landing point for the densest mix of species, simply because its existing infrastructure was the most adaptable. Within 2 years, it was unrecognizable. Gurok atmospheric processors hummed alongside human power grids. Toll construction teams, faster and stronger than any human crew, built towers that combined their architectural instincts with human engineering specs, producing buildings that looked like nothing else on any world I had visited. Vethari memory archivists set up recording stations in the market districts and began documenting everything, because that is what we do, because our history had nearly been lost, and we were not willing to lose anything more. I was in the market on the afternoon I saw the girl, and the toll child playing with the colored stones. She was perhaps 8 years old, with red hair and a gap in her front teeth. The toll child was 3 times her height, and covered in the dense gray plating that their young develop in their second growth stage. They were playing some kind of game neither of them could explain to the other, because they had no shared language. They had invented the rules themselves, from scratch, communicating through gesture and repetition, and the universal language of a child pointing at something and waiting to see if the other child understands. They played for an hour. Neither of them won. Neither of them seemed to care. I sat on a bench and watched them, and thought about the conclave gallery, and the scrolling exile orders, and the silence of 240 species, watching 17 peoples be erased from the map. I thought about the sound that silence made. Then I listened to the market around me. Gurok traders arguing prices in their own dialect while a human teenager translated into 3 languages simultaneously. A toll vendor stacking root vegetables next to a display of human produce. A group of Vethari elders debating philosophy loudly, near a fountain that had been redesigned 3 times to accommodate the different gravitational preferences of the species who used it. The chaos was still there. It had not gone anywhere, but it had changed shape. Owen found me on that bench. He sat down without asking permission, which I had stopped minding months earlier. He had a container of something hot, and he offered me half of it. I accepted. "What do you think?" he asked. He asked me this regularly. He was genuinely curious, not politely curious, and there is a significant difference. "I think," I said, that your species has a very unusual relationship with disorder. He thought about this. Is that good? I have not decided yet, I said. But I am leaning toward yes. He smiled and drank his tea, or whatever the hot liquid was, and we sat in the noise and the movement, and the improbable fact of New Nairobi existing at all, and I realized that something had happened to me at some point in the past 2 years that I had not been paying attention to. I had stopped waiting to leave. I had stopped thinking of this as temporary. I had started calling it home, quietly, in the language I used only inside my own head, the one I did not translate for anyone. The conclave sent their delegation 7 years after the exile order. I was at the meeting. Director Cole had asked me to serve as primary interpreter for the Earth Provisional Authority, and I had accepted without hesitation because I wanted to be in the room, and I trusted no one else to translate accurately in both directions. I had spent enough years watching diplomatic translation used as a tool of softening, of smoothing, of making the powerful more comfortable. The conclave representative was an elder Shari named Vel Omnis. He was 3 centuries old and had the particular stillness of someone who had never once in his life been told no and believed it. He arrived with a staff of 14 and a set of data reports that his people had been compiling for years. They covered population integration rates, resource expenditure, interspecies conflict incidents, economic output. Vel Omnis read through them at the table with the expression of someone looking for a flaw and being mildly irritated at not finding a large enough one. You have created a destabilizing precedent, he said. He was addressing Cole. He had barely looked at me, which suited me fine. Perhaps, she said, other displaced populations will expect the same treatment. I expect they will. He set down the report. Earth does not have the political standing to challenge conclave resettlement frameworks. Cole leaned forward slightly. She had a way of leaning forward that was not aggressive and not submissive, and was somehow more unsettling than either. We haven't challenged anything, she said. We made a decision about our own planet. Those are different actions. The distinction is technical. The distinction is real. Vel Omnis was quiet for a moment. I watched him recalibrate, which for a Shari elder is an almost invisible process. A slight shift in posture, a slow breath, the eyes refocusing. What is it that you want from this meeting? He asked. Cole did not hesitate. Full membership in the conclave, for Earth, and for every species currently residing here. All 17. She paused one beat. They came with us, they stand with us. The silence that followed lasted 11 seconds. I have a perfect memory. I counted every one of them. Vel Omnis said, very carefully. That is not how membership is obtained. It is now, Cole said, or it isn't, and we keep doing what we're doing without you, and in another 7 years, you come back and have this conversation again, with a much larger constituency behind us. Another silence, shorter this time. Vel Omnis glanced at his staff. None of them offered anything useful to his expression. He looked back at Cole. Then, for just a fraction of a second, he looked at me. I held his gaze and did not blink. We will need to consult the full assembly, he said. Of course, Cole said. We're not going anywhere. The answer came 4 months later. Not immediately, not graciously, not without conditions that took another 2 years of negotiation to clarify, but the answer came. Yes. I was sitting in the same park in New Nairobi when Owen called me with the news. It was autumn by the human calendar, the trees in the park doing the thing they do where they turn colors before they let go of their leaves, which I had found bewildering the first time I saw it, and now found quietly beautiful. Owen's voice was shaking a little. He had not expected yes either, not really, even though he had worked toward it every day for 7 years. Kale, he said, did you hear? I heard, I said. He let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for a very long time. What do you think? I looked at the park around me. 2 Vethari elders arguing near the fountain, a Gurak family spreading a meal cloth on the grass, a Toll teenager reading something on a tablet, lying on her back with her legs folded in the way that Toll find comfortable and humans find alarming the first time they see it. A group of human children running between the trees, 2 of them being chased by a Gurak child who was faster than all of them and clearly delighted about it. I think, I said, that the galaxy has no idea what it just agreed to. Owen laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that surprised him. Is that good? Yes, I said. This time I am certain. I stayed on the bench for a long time after I ended the call. The sun moved across the sky the way it does on Earth, at an angle and a pace I had spent the first year finding wrong, and spent every year after that finding right. A Vethari elder I recognized from the archive project walked past and nodded at me. I nodded back. A human woman pushing a small cart stopped near the fountain to let her child drink from it. The child was perhaps 3 years old and deeply committed to the task, using both hands and most of their face. A toll trader carrying a bundle twice his height moved through the market path without slowing down, navigating the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this for years. I thought about the freight hauler, the cargo hold with the failing air recyclers, the handwritten sign with my name spelled wrong, the 7 foods on the table, one of which tasted strange, all of which I ate. I had lived on 14 worlds before Earth. I had been an ambassador on 6 of them, a diplomat on 4, and briefly a prisoner on 1, which is a story for another time. I had seen great cities, and ancient ones, and dead ones. I had watched species rise, and I had watched the conclave make its tidy administrative decisions about which ones would be permitted to keep rising, and which ones would be quietly redirected toward irrelevance. I had never seen anything like this place. Not because it was perfect, it was very far from perfect. The resource arguments never fully stopped. The translation errors stacked up for years. There were incidents, bad ones, between species who carried old wounds and new frustrations, and those incidents had to be addressed and worked through in the loud, messy, public way that humans seemed incapable of avoiding, and that I had come to think was actually essential to how they solved anything. They could not pretend. They were constitutionally incapable of the elegant diplomatic silence that allowed problems to calcify into permanent policy. They argued until something shifted. Then they argued about the shift. It was exhausting, and it was alive, and it was nothing like the conclave chamber, with its scrolling exile orders, and its 240 sigils raised without a murmur. Cole found me in the park 2 days after the conclave's answer was officially filed. She sat down on the bench beside me without ceremony, the way people do when they have run out of ceremony and are left with themselves. She looked tired in the way that meant something had finally been put down after a very long carry. 7 years, she said. Yes, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, was it worth it? For your people? I thought about the question carefully, which is the only way I know how to think about anything. I thought about the archive, nearly complete now, 2,000 years of Vethari memory, digitized and stored and safe. I thought about the young Vethari, who had been children on the freight hauler and were now growing up in a city that held their language alongside 30 others. I thought about the elders who had sat in that terrible silence of displacement and had slowly, over years, found a different kind of silence. The peaceful kind, the kind that means you are somewhere and it is enough. Yes, I said. Cole nodded. She did not say you're welcome. She was not that kind of person. She sat with me for a while in the noise and color and improbable life of New Nairobi, and then she stood up and went back to whatever came next, because there was always something next, and she had never once in 7 years let that stop her. I stayed until the light changed. I watched the market close and the evening vendors arrive, and the lights come on across the city, in a pattern I knew now as well as I knew my own heartbeat, the blue of Garak processors, the warm amber of human street lamps, the cooler white of toll-built towers, the soft violet panels the Vethari quarter used, that were the closest approximation of home light we had been able to build on a world that was not home. Except it was now. That was the thing. That was the whole quiet, enormous, unlikely thing. The galaxy had looked at 17 peoples and decided they were the problem. It had drawn a line and put us on the wrong side of it and called that order. And one planet, one young, chaotic, under-resourced, completely unqualified planet, had looked at the same 17 peoples and seen something different. Not a problem, not a liability, not a complication in someone else's framework of civilizational cohesion. People, just people, who needed somewhere to be. Earth had opened its doors, not because it was ready, not because it had a plan, Because a woman in a plain dark jacket stood at a podium without notes and said we will sort out the rest as we go, and then they actually did. Badly at first, and then better, and then in ways none of us had imagined, ways that had changed all of us, the exiled and the hosts alike, into something none of us had been before. I do not have a clean word for what I am now. The Vethari language has many words for what a person was, and fewer for what a person is becoming. The closest human term, Owen once told me, is neighbor. I have decided I will take it. The galaxy banished us, all 17 peoples, cast out into the dark between stars with no map and no welcome and nowhere to go. Earth opened its doors, and nothing in the galaxy has been the same since.